My hands are clean. Hello. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You know the drill here, right? My name is Quinn Jacobson, and this is the Studio Q show live, as we like to call it. Most of you watch it after we push it out there, but that's okay. However you want to, whichever way you want to watch is fine. I am sitting in my home right now, bare and empty. The water was flowing yesterday. I came over this morning and the water is not flowing. So there's issues that we still have to resolve. We do have power. We do have an internet connection, obviously, even better than the one that I had before. And so we're making progress step by step, but we'll see if we can't get all this stuff sorted out. Hello, everyone. Will and Jan and Dale and Steve Wilson. Good to see you, man. Yeah, things are well. Just battling the home build, as they say, right? I mean, crisis after crisis. Jeffrey and Bogoslav, good to see you guys too. Yeah, excellent. And Pablo, great. Let's get going. Malit01, hello from Brooklyn. You're not lurking, you're in now, right? I mean, so let's get going. We can do this. I think we're not going to have any issues today. I better not say that. Every time I say that, we have issues. So I'm going to try to be as competent technically as I can here and prevent anything terrible from happening. Let's make sure that's up and going. Yes, it is. Good. So here we go. So last week I tried to give you some information on the Alfred brothers book. And this is interesting because, like so many of the 19th century manuals on wet collodion photography, they have a different approach. Like some things are similar. You're going to see some things that aren't. We're going to go through the process of seeing or reading about their approach to making first the negative and then the positive. And then we have a couple of nice, actually, we're going to do the positive next time. But we have a technical Q&A time after that. I'll do a recommended reading kind of thing, like I said I'd do. And then we're going to do a little bit of a new thing called shout outs, where I like to give people, credit where credit is due. If they're doing good things in the community, if they're doing, interesting stuff. I haven't had anybody submit any work to show lately, so this is a good fill for making that happen. So there's our outline for this morning. Now let's go ahead and jump right into it and get going on this. Hey, Malit. Hey, Karsten, good to see you. Paul Smith, good. We're going to talk about Paul's stuff today. And Thylo from Japan, good to see you, brother. Always good to see everybody, all the regulars and new people as well. So I went through and did screenshots on all of this. I'm just going to start over again this morning, or when you're watching this or listening to this. And again, this is Alfred Brothers. I call it the Manual of Photography because inside it's got a longer name, but inside that's kind of where they break it down. That's the short version. I didn't want to fit that, 25 word title up there. This is important. This is the 1892 edition. There is an 1899 edition, I believe. I haven't looked at that one yet. I'll go through this one first. But this is a 514-page manual. I put it on the link. Let's see. I put the link, for Google in the YouTube chat. And I also put it, I think, let me check this out here. Maybe I didn't put it in the StreamYard. Let me shoot this over. If you haven't got the book, you should go grab it. It's free. It's easy. There we go. Show. Yeah, that's a little more difficult to get, huh? Can we copy that? And put it over here. I'll try to put it in the comment section on the StreamYard if I can. Private chat, maybe that's where we want to go. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so it's both places now. And Alfred Brothers, the book itself is super comprehensive. We're just going to look at this first part. And And if you look at the index or the chapters, you'll see that they go through everything. We're going to start with the wet collodion process here in the variant of making negatives. And he goes, they talk about, the quality of the negative, the wet collodion negative, with the exception of the daguerreotype, of course. They say, of all the photographic processes, no results, if we accept the daguerreotype, have ever surpassed those produced on plates prepared by the wet collodion method. That's quite a statement. Keep in mind, this is 1892, so this is quite a bit later. Turn of the century, he'll talk about this just in a second. Wet collodion started dying out when the introduction of dry plates. And by 1880, the wet collodion process was pretty much abandoned, so to speak. Not really, it's always been around. I'm using that term in a very broad way. But he goes on to say, and although the introduction of dry plates right there, prepared with a collodion or gelatin emulsion or gelatine emulsion and various other ways may be said to have taken the place of the older processes for certain purposes, the wet collodion has not been superseded, and probably it may never be entirely. What a prophetic and insightful comment that is, and that's very true. I mean, look at what we're doing today. If you make a beautiful wet collodion negative, and I mean beautiful by well exposed, proper densities, good light, proper optics, all that good stuff coming together, you're going to be hard pressed to find a superior. And what he's talking about here is the quality. The detail's extreme. I mean, it's virtually grainless, right? That's why they use the wet collodion process all the way up into the 40s, 50s, and even in the 1960s in scientific reproduction, before digital stuff and even film wasn't good enough. So for portraiture and landscape, collodion is now seldom or never used. That's another interesting comment. But for some kinds of work, gelatin plates are not so suitable as collodion. And the cost of collodion, when large plates are used, is greatly in its favor. So in other words, obviously the dry plates were a lot more expensive, and the bigger you went, the more cost it was. And he's saying here that collodion is financially a better deal. For this reason, as well as for very superior results which may be obtained, a full description of the wet collodion process is considered to be desirable here. So that's what we're going to do. Then he goes on to say, probably not 1% of the large army of amateurs and operators who have taken to the practice of the art within the last 10 years have ever prepared a wet plate, and it may be have never seen one prepared. So he's saying all these new photographers around him they've never even seen the process. They've never done it. They've never seen it, let alone done it. So this is 1892. So that means 1882. So there's the confirmation of the environment or the atmosphere in the 1890s and the attitude in the photography world, the attitude toward wet collodion. So, you read the history of it, that backs up everything that we know about it as far as when it was when the masses or the pros and the amateurs, and what does he call them? The amateurs and operators. So an army of amateurs and operators. So amateurs would be non-professionals, and the operators would be the professional, probably commercial photographers. So they've never even prepared a plate or seen it or even prepared a plate. The modern photographer who, with his instantaneous shutter and 60 times dry gelatin plates, meaning, how fast it was in comparison, succeeds in showing a train moving at the rate of 40 miles an hour as if it were standing still. So we start getting into this, these advantages of moving away, not only not having to bring a dark room with you and do the plates, the wet collodion process on site all the way through. Dry plates, you load them, pack them around, expose them. They're faster. Take them back to your studio and process them in 6 months or whatever. There was a lot of latitude there. So so when I say dead process there on the left, it means we're just reiterating what was happening in the collodion world at that time. So then he goes into the process itself. We're going to start with cleaning the plate, of course. So we know the steps of the process, and we're going to jump through them here. And I'm going to point out some really interesting differences for the Alfred Brothers publication here versus what we're doing today. The glass used, excepting for any special purpose, need not be patent plate, meaning the really super expensive stuff would always be preferred. The best flatted crown or sheet glass, not too thin, answers every purpose. The glass must be perfectly clean. Rouge, whitening, or fine Tripoli powder mixed with spirits of wine to the consistency of a thick cream may be dabbed on the glass after it has first been well rubbed over with a pad of flannel and rinsed under a tap. The Tripoli is then well rubbed over the plate and rinsed off under running water. And Tripoli is rotten stone. And if you don't know what rotten stone is, it's a dark kind of gray. It's the pumice or powder from rock. So they think of really, really tiny little pieces of rock, that abrasive kind of. That's what I like about calcium carbonate. It's like a 8,000 grit, 10,000 grit sandpaper. But it cleans, and the oil or the spirits of alcohol or the spirits of wine, alcohol is what he's calling it. With that and the abrasive, you're going to clean off any substance on the glass. And it's really important to get oils from your hands and processing and how the glass is made, the packaging, all that stuff. You need to make sure you really, really work that plate. The cloths used for drying the glass should be washed without soap. And again, there's little indicators here. The flannel or the material you're using to clean the plate off after or do the final rub on it or clean on it, or after it's wetted and cleaned off, and you're drying the plate, or anytime you put a material to that plate after you've quote cleaned it, if that has any material in it like soap, washing a dish rag in a washing machine with a particular type of soap or clothes cleaning like Tide or these brands in America, that will have a residue in there, and you're just applying that. So a lot of people don't, there's really subtle hints in here. They probably should go into that, but they say it, drying the glass should be washed without soap, and the final polish should be given with wash leather or silk. So look at the extremities they went to make sure that their glass was clean, and they're setting themselves up for success the best they can. In the latter case, the plate should not be used at once, as it is possible electrical condition may cause it to attract dust. So what we call static electricity, after rubbing something, that static electricity will pull anything out of the air and put it on the plate. You might not even see it. But here's another interesting topic, and I talk about this quite often, but when breathed upon, the glass will show at once if the surface be clean. What does that mean? Breathed upon, the surface to be clean. And if it's not clean, the picture will probably show stains of some kind, or the film may leave the plate while under development or in the course of drying, meaning lifting and peeling. There are some advantages in using albumin as a substratum, as has already been explained on page 69. You can look at his formula for coating. So let's go back here. What does this mean when breathed upon? Anybody have any ideas on what he means by that? Breathe upon. In English, we say, we huff on the plate, right? And you get that hot, humid air, exhale, CO2 on the plate. And if that's perfectly clear, is what he's saying. If you clean a glass plate and you huff on it and you see your breath on there and it's perfectly clear and clean and there's no marks or swirls, you're good to go. If there are, you need to go back and clean it. So huffing on the plate will tell you if it's clean or not. It's an interesting but super, super effective method. Hello, Peter from Connecticut. Good to see you. So really important. Little tips and tricks, making sure the materials that you're using on your plate are clean, making methodologies to test to see if you've cleaned the plate well enough, and it's real easy to do. just huff a couple of different places and you'll see if you have any marks or swirls or anything, you need to go back and clean again. So here's where he starts talking. So we've cleaned the glass. Now he's talking about pouring collodion on. While coating with collodion, small plates may be held between the finger and the thumb of the left hand. What he's saying is to do this pinch method, right? So you're going to run the collodion right up to your finger where you're pinching it. I don't really care for that method because then you get into trouble with that edge lifting. I mean, I've done a lot of them that way. And if you're good at cleaning plates, or you use some kind of albumin as a binder, you know, or as a substratum for holding that collodion in place, or gelatin, that's fine. But I like to do the waiter tray so I can cover the entire plate. But for large plates, it's better to use a pneumatic holder. A pneumatic holder meaning a suction cup. And very true with that. I got some big, what we call 5-inch suction cups like that, 18 centimeters or so, and open them up, stick them on the back of the plate, lock them down, and you can manipulate the plates just fine. So suction cups are great, especially for larger plates. Some people have a problem getting the suction cup off of the glass. There's some other problems, but you get the method down and it's really good. And he's recommending that for large plates. The collodion should, by preference, be poured on from a collodion pourer, which is a tall, narrow bottle having a wide mouth and a glass cover. All he's saying there is you don't want a tight little, you don't want a great big bottle with a tiny little opening. At the end of the day, you're looking at turning a bottle up like this, and you'll get this chug, 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 chug if the opening isn't large enough. So when he talks about a collodion pourer, it's almost like a syrup jar. And in fact, if you could do that and keep your collodion sealed, that'd be ideal. Like just a big wide opening so you don't get any chug, chug, chug like that. That's what he's talking about, a collodion pourer. The advantages of a bottle of this kind is that the sediment settles at the bottom and is not readily disturbed. That's another thing too. The sediment's going to settle anyway in any bottle, but what he's talking about is that action of trying to get the collodion out of a small opening of the bottle, and that's what will disturb your sediment for sure. The bottle should be replenished when about 2/3 of the collodion have been used. And occasionally the sediment should be poured into another receptacle and used up with other stock. If preferred, I love this, if preferred, the collodion may be poured off the plate into another bottle, but long experience has shown this to be scarcely necessary. Isn't that interesting? So I always preach about having a collodion pour bottle and a collodion drain bottle. And let me explain. I mean, he says if it's preferred, do it. He says he doesn't do that. He must have lived, well, he lived in the UK, right? But he must have lived in an area where it's quite humid. I've lived most of my life, not all of it, in dry, high desert climates. So my initial reason for using a drain bottle, to pour a bottle, set that bottle aside and use a drain bottle to drain the excess collodion off the plate, my main reason for that is the dryness in the environments that I'm working in. Your ether's gone, your alcohol, even the water starts to evaporate a little bit in super dry climates. And that means the difference between especially your ether and a little bit of your alcohol in your drain bottle is very different than your pour bottle. And then another reason is that if you're outside or you're working in conditions where you might get some dust or a bug or something, and you don't want to drain that back into your pour bottle. You want a drain bottle so you can both reconstitute the solvents if you need, mainly ether, and some alcohol if you want, and also be able to filter that through an unbleached coffee filter if you have bugs or dust or whatever. So it just makes sense to me, and I prefer this to use a drain bottle. And I encourage people to do it. I know it's another piece of equipment, but at the end of the day, it's worked very well for me, and I've never had any of these thick, gummy collodions or dirty collodion and all that stuff. He does say you should only go down, if you have a bottle that big, you should only go down 2/3. So leave that, don't disturb that kind of thing. So he's trying to decant by pouring and getting the best, cleanest collodion that he can. After the plate has been fixed on the pneumatic holder, it should be examined for particulates of dust, or particles of dust, which should be brushed off with a broad camel's hair brush. I always tell people you can use the old negative cleaner, right? The old plutonium brush cleaner that attracts the dust. Makeup brushes, you know, the women's makeup brushes work well. Big paint brushes, anything with he says a broad camel's hair brush, which is fine. The dust should not be blown off. Why do you think the dust should not be blown off? As you're sitting there and you're looking at, you can see a little bit of dust on your plate. Rather than taking a brush and brushing it off, you go, well, guess what you get? You spit. You get a little bit of sputum spit on the plate, and that'll cause problems as well too. And I know that's happened to people. I've had it in the email. It's taken a minute to figure out what it was, but at the end of the day, they're blowing. So don't blow on your plate after you've cleaned it. And not spots of saliva may be carried with the breath and cause defects when the picture is developed. The next process is to coat the plate with collodion. Whether held with or without the plate holder, the glass must be level as possible. Then pour on as much collodion as may appear rather more than sufficient to cover the plate. This is how I teach it as well too. So all of my information I get from these sources, right? So what he's saying is hold the plate level, whether you have a suction cup or you're doing waiter tray, hold it level, pour out. And what I tell people is make a big pancake puddle almost to the edge, to the edges. It'll be a great big puddle on, you know, a smaller plate, you know, larger plate, whatever, big puddle almost to the edge of the plate. And what'll happen there is you'll have excess collodion on the plate. You want more collodion than it'll take to cover the plate. Why is that? Because you cannot pour collodion back on. If you have a short pour and you've got a big hole here and you pour collodion up there, it's going to be you're going to have ridges and flow marks and all kinds of problems. So that's what he's talking about there. Pour on as much collodion as may appear rather more than sufficient to cover the plate. And in contemporary American English, put more on it than you need because you don't want a short pour. And then he goes through and he says, let the collodion flow first to the right-hand corner, furthest from you, then to the left, next to the left-hand corner near you. And he's just talking about taking it around the corners. Like I have this method. If you have my book, you know, we pour collodion out, A, B, C, D for drain. We have that little methodology down there. That's basically what he's saying too. Maybe just a little bit different, but you get the idea. So the next is to he's going on to coat the plate, whether held with or without the holder. So we just went through that. A little practice will soon give confidence and enable the operation to be conducted without any of the collodion being spilled. That's the biggest thing. People always think, new people coming into the process, always think that pouring the collodion is the difficult part in the process. It is not. Developing the plate is the difficult part in the process. So I always tell people the same thing. After you pour a couple of plates here, you're going to be good to go. It's the developer you're going to struggle with later when you're throughout the day or throughout the course. So people, and spillage is important because that's your emulsion, that's your film, that's your base for your image. So if you lose that, it's expensive. It's got salts in it. It's got solvents in it. So you want to be as conservative as possible, and you don't want to spill a bunch. In the beginning, it happens, but there is no necessity for haste, but there should be no time lost. That's an interesting 19th century British English way to say, do it fast, but don't do it so fast you mess up, right? That's kind of the gist of that. If the coating is not affected, in daylight. No flame of any kind should be near, owing to the highly flammable nature of the solution. So there's a good little safety tip, right? You shouldn't be pouring plates with an open flame around you, or a water heater or furnace or that kind of thing. The daylight is not going to affect the collodion, right? Because we haven't introduced those salts in the collodion to the silver, so they're not sensitive. So do this in good light so you can see what you're doing. While the collodion is running back into the bottle, the plate should be gently moved from side to side with kind of a rocking motion to prevent the film from setting irregularly, meaning you don't want these lines and these ridges and those kinds of things. So if you just tilt it, you might get some streaks. If you move it, it's still fluid enough, it'll smooth those out. When the collodion has almost ceased to drip, the cover may be put on the bottle and attention given entirely to the plate to ascertain whether it's ready to put into the bath. So here's where a lot of people mess up when they're just coming into the process. They either wait too long to put the plate in the bath or they put it in too soon. And I'll talk a little bit about both of those. To ascertain this, touch the corner from which the collodion was poured, and the finger will at once show if it's too wet. After a few seconds, the plate meanwhile being constantly rocked, so he's even moving it in the air, touch the plate again. And if the collodion will not adhere to the finger, then it's ready to be sensitized. So in other words, he's still moving the plate, he checks it, it's still wet. It doesn't leave an impression on his finger or thumb. Then a few seconds later, he touches it again and he can see a fingerprint mark, meaning that the collodion started to skin over. That's the appropriate time to then go to your bath and put it in your bath. And depending on where you live, your temperature, humidity, the conditions, that can be anywhere from 20 seconds to, a minute, maybe, rarely, but it could be, depending if it's, very cool and wet, that kind of thing. If you pour the collodion on a plate, drain it, and once it slows down the drip and you just throw it in your silver bath, it's probably going to lift off the plate anyway, but what you're going to do is you're going to introduce a ton of solvents, ether and alcohol, into that bath. So that's going to start causing problems right away for you. So you need to make sure it skins over, then put it in. This is a fine line you have to walk in this process. If you let it skin over and you see your fingerprint and you still sit there and hold it and you're talking with your friend for 2 minutes and then you go to drop it in the silver bath, you're going to pull it out and you're going to see the edges are going to start creeping in and drying down. It'll start drying down that fast. The collodion won't be sensitized. It won't be sensitive. The silver won't do anything with it. And you'll definitely see the drying edges. In my book, in the chapter 8, you can see troubleshooting. You see what a drying plate, those distinct areas where it dries in from the edges of the plate, shows real easy, and you'll see that. Really important stuff there, really important stuff. So let's go to the silver bath. So you've dropped it in the silver bath. Let's talk about his solution. Remember the 35 grain bath we talked about? Anybody have any idea what this 35 grain bath is? What is that percentage of silver nitrate in this silver bath? In other words, what percentage of silver bath is he using? We typically use 9%, right? That's kind of what the standard is. But you know what? I got to tell you, don't believe in any strict time in the bath for sensitizing the plate, and don't believe in any strict percentage of silver in your bath. It needs to be correlated and put together with what you're trying to do, right? How old your collodion is, what kind of image, are you making a negative or a positive? Those kinds of things. Anybody have any idea on, oh, Peter, yes. Yes, I can do that. Peter wants a link to my book. I can get that. Or you can go on Amazon and search my name. You'll find it. But I will get you the link. So anybody have any idea on what the percentage of that bath is, the 35 grain bath? Remember we talked about 35 grain and 40 grain? People are, let me see if I can get in here. Sorry, here I am again. I promise you I would be technically savvy today, and I'm not. Okay, I have to get down low enough to be able to see who they are here. Huh. Oh, here we go. There, we got everybody in now. Sorry, guys. I didn't see over there. I only see my screen that I'm talking, my slideshow. So forgive me if I miss your comments. Unmute yourself if you're in StreamYard and say, hey, there's somebody asking this, or if you want to ask something. But anyway, this 2.25 grams per ounce of water. Okay, Dale, what is that? Tell me what percentage of bath is that? Because you're going to hear that if you read the 19th century manuals, 35 and 40 grain baths are constantly brought up. That's what they use, 35 and 40 grain. This happens to be a 7.8% silver bath. So when we look at a 7.8% silver bath, and we're always, this would be down in the 1.65, 1.68 on your hydrometer. And the 40 grain would be up around 9%-ish, 8.8, 9%. So a lot of times these contemporary operators, photographers, teachers that teach this wet plate process will just stick solely to 9%, right? 90 grams of silver nitrate into 1 liter of distilled water, and that'll give you 90%. But that can cause a lot of problems depending on your collodion. I'll talk about that another time, but depending on your collodion, your iodide level, and all that kind of stuff, and depending on what kind of variant you're trying to make too. The silver bath must be made slightly acidic with pure nitric acid. People ask me all the time, can I use glacial acidic acid to lower my pH in my silver bath? Yes, you can, but the problem is going to be, not the problem, but the potential problem is glacial acidic acid is kind of a foreign substance or a foreign acid to the silver bath. We know how silver baths are made, and they're made with nitric acid. It's silver, burned in with silver bouillon with nitric acid poured over it, right? And then dries, and you have silver agno3, silver nitrate crystals. So I like to use nitric acid to lower my pH and adjust the pH on my baths. Yeah, Boguslaw, 7, you got it. Very good. Boguslaw's good at math. So this is really important to understand and get into what does a 10% silver bath do, and what does a 6% silver bath do in the process. And we'll start. Well, maybe I can do a whole segment on that. We'll talk about that balance of iodides and this what we call double decomposition. Remember that one? Double decomposition. I think it's page 53 in my book, if I'm not mistaken. But you can read about double decomposition, and that's what the basis is of this discussion about how much silver in your bath and what pH. And we're going to talk a little bit about pH because Pablo wrote me an email, a couple of emails, and we're going to discuss a little bit on pH here. If good distilled water can be obtained, it should be used in making the silver bath. That's so true. Unless the ordinary water available is known to be approximately pure, as in the case of Manchester and Glasgow. So he's talking about the quality of water in that particular area. That's pretty good. Rainwater may be used, but this often contains organic matter, which may be got rid of by exposing the solution in sunlight for a few hours. So here's the bottom line. If you didn't have, this is 19th century we're talking about. If you didn't have access to clean water, even rainwater would have some dissolved solids in it. The total dissolved solids, or ppm. If there's something in water and you put a TDS meter in there, it'll tell you how many parts per million or parts per billion, usually parts per million, that water has something in it, like 300 parts per million or 500 parts per million. Dale, 7.5, assuming Alfred's were American, point being US ounces different than UK. That's true. I would say anywhere between 7.5% and 8% on that. I call it a 7.8% bath, but 78 grams to the liter. 75 grams to the liter would be fine. Even 80 grams to the liter, which Boguslaw talked about, would be fine too. But rainwater can be dirty. Distilled water is ppm 0, pH 7. That's why we use it. That's why we know there's nothing in it to interact with the silver nitrate. But what he's saying is if you happen upon some deionized or distilled water that's not clean, and I've had that happen to me in Spain, in Hungary. There's a couple of places that I've had people bring in distilled or deionized water and the silver bath goes immediately gray and blue, cloudy. Put it out in the sun for a day or a few hours. It'll drop to the bottom. You can siphon it off. It'll come out. It'll take a little bit of silver with it, but it'll come out. But what he's saying is use as fresh water as you can. If used fresh as thus prepared, the bath will not be found to work well owing to its readiness to attack the iodide contained in the collodion. Therefore, it is better to coat a plate with collodion and leave it in for a few hours in the silver solution. So he jumps right from clean or dirty water, mixing the bath, to saying, if this is a fresh bath, if you just made this silver bath and you pour a plate and you put it in there and you try to make an image with it, that silver bath is going to steal the iodides away from the plate. It wants to be full of iodides before it can allow the iodides to basically decompose or turn in metallic silver, right? That double decomposition. If using fresh prepared, the bath will not be found to work well, owing its readiness to attack the iodide contained in the collodion. Therefore, it's better to coat a plate with collodion, leave it for a few hours in the silver solution. A small quantity of collodion poured into it will answer the same purpose, or a crystal of potassium iodide may be used to dissolve and add to the bath. That's what I'm telling people now. If you have a liter, a brand new silver bath, and you don't want to pour a glass plate, a big glass plate with old red collodion, put in it and sensitize it or excite it, use a ½ gram of potassium iodide, put it in the bath, shake it up. You might have to filter it, but it'll be ready to go. He's talking about just pouring some collodion right into your silver bath, which would work too. But care must be taken not to over-iodize the solution. Why is that? As the presence of too much iodine causes pinholes in the film. So we know about this after working a bath hard. The excess iodide, so you say, well, you're saying to fill it up and overfill it with iodides, and now you're saying too much iodide, you'll have pinholes. And that's right. It's a very unique balance. Once you cross that threshold of having too much, work your bath really hard, the iodides will land down right on the plate, precipitate out, and clear the collodion. It'll be black holes on your aluminitypes or black tintypes, and it'll be clear on your negatives. You'll have little tiny clear holes all over the plate. It's better not to use the bath at once. Here's something different, okay? It's better not to use the bath at once, but allow it to stand for a day or two when it should be, and then it should be filtered, when it should be filtered. The vessel to contain the bath solution may be of glass, porcelain, vulcanite, preferably the first. And for most purposes, it's better to use a dipping bath. So what he's saying there, glass is the best material to deal with and store silver nitrate. And people always ask me, man, you use glass containers, what about dropping those? And they're clear, they're not even amber. I say, yeah, it keeps me honest, let the daylight hit it if I'm working with it. It means that I have to keep my silver bath clean, and I know nothing's interacting with it because it's glass that it's stored in. People ask me about plastic. I say, no, don't, if you can help it, don't store your silver in plastic. I mean, I've done it before, distilled water bottles, just vessels that I can't buy, $500 5-liter, glass Chemex bottles or something, right? So I've used plastic. I wouldn't keep them in the plastic very long, and I surely wouldn't put it in the sun, heat, or light source with plastic because you never know how that plastic's made. What he's talking about, a dipping bath or the silver baths that we use, right? The little boxes with an insert, and you've got a dipping dipper for a plate dipper. A porcelain or glass dish may be used for large plates as a well bath made of wood thoroughly coated with black varnish is efficient. The flat black is advantage in not requiring so much solution of silver. So what he's talking about, you can use pans. When I first started, I just used 8x10 clean, brand new photographic trays, and I just put the plate in, put the silver nitrate all the way to one end, put the plate in, and then let it rush over it. And then every once in a while, I just rock the plate. So this is, okay, let me jump down here. The bath being ready and the plate coated as described must be placed on the dipper with the thin end of the collodion film foremost. Catch that right there. The bath being ready and the plate coated as described, it must be placed on the dipper with the thin end of the collodion film foremost, meaning your top, you want to flip it around, basically, is what he's saying. This is the end. This is the end opposite to that from which the collodion was poured off. The film being thinner here because during the drying lower end and pouring off retains more collodion, of course. Exactly. He's talking about just like when we make prints and everything else. The plate must be lowered with a continuous motion. Since any hesitation occurs, the mark will be formed across and it will be spoilt or ruined. An old 19th century British word, spoilt. Basically, when you lower your plate into your bath, one good smooth motion, don't jam it down and spray silver nitrate everywhere. One good motion down in, quickly but not aggressive. And if you stop, well, I call them hesitation lines. If you stop, you'll get a mark, like he's saying. And again, this is, all of this information is all over in these books in the 19th century. You just have to dig it out and read it. When a flat dish is used, care must be taken to tilt the dish so that the fluid is at one end, just like I said, and the plate then is placed in the dish, which same is lowered. Silver solution flows over the film. The collodionized plate will be seen at once to change. A tinge of milkiness appears, which continues to increase until it becomes a creamy whiteness, or when seen in daylight, a delicate yellow tint. What occurs is that the iodide and bromide held in the collodion are colorless, so also is the silver solution. But the iodide and bromide of silver, AgI, AgBr, which are formed when the plate is placed in the solution, are not colorless. Double decomposition changes the color. When the decomposition is complete, the coated plate has acquired the quality of extreme sensibility to light, meaning it's light sensitive. Let me go back here and make sure we're still okay. I feel like I'm talking to myself. Okay, good. Well, could reverse osmosis water be? Yes. Reverse osmosis water is great, Jeffrey. Yes. If you're not smoking or air from kitchen area. Yeah, air dehumidifiers are great. Basically, they produce distilled water. That's what they do, right? They pull water out of the air. They're great for that. I'm just reading the comments there. So yeah, I have to come back. I'm getting my own little world over here. Okay, so let me go back here just one screen. So it's sensitive to light. That's ready for exposure in the camera. May be known from the streaky greasiness, which is at first assumes having disappeared. Wow, we've really, English speakers, American English speakers, we've really changed the language here. I would say it like this. It's ready for exposure in the camera, may be known from the, okay. You'll know when it's ready to put in your plate holder and expose the plate when you lift the plate out of the silver bath and none of those rivulets or that greasy look is gone. You pull it out and the silver just streaks right over the plate like that. Smooth. And again, we say 3 minutes is a general rule. In the summertime, it might be 2. In the wintertime, it might be 4. You do it by visual inspection. Pull it out and look at your plate. And when that streaky greasiness is gone, that's what he calls it, it's ready to load into your holder. And there you go. No definite time can be fixed for allowing the plate to remain in the bath as temperature affects the results. Exactly. Cold has a retarding effect, so that in cold weather, if practicable, the dark room should be warm. So if it's reasonable to warm your dark room, and he's really talking if it's practical or not, because putting a wood burning stove in your dark room kind of might have some problems with the ether and the collodion. But it should be warm, meaning that you're going to have, if you do 3 minutes in extreme cold weather, you're not going to be fully sensitized, and vice versa. If it's super hot and you run it a long time, you might have some problems there as well. The operation of making the plate sensitive to light must be conducted in the dark room. That is, in the room into which only yellow light is admitted. I'd say red light. I go a grade above. The yellow's down here in the 650 nanometers. I go all the way up to the 700 nanometers. Collodion cannot see red at all. When removed from the silver bath, the plate must be allowed to drain. This is transferred to a sheet of blotting paper. In other words, take it out, wipe the back off, blot all that excess or as much as that excess silver nitrate you can off of it, so you save your equipment is basically what we're doing. The plate must be allowed to drain, transfer to sheet blotting paper. While resting, the back is wiped with blotting paper. This is not only saves the silver, but prevents injury to the dark slide or plate holder, right? Next, place the plate in the dark slide of the camera. It's better to put slips of blotting paper in the lower corners to collect. So what he's talking about, put your plate in the plate holder and put a couple little blotter, a couple little pieces of paper towel or something clean down on the corners to absorb all of that excess silver that gravity's going to pull down there. It'll save your plate holder, right? And oysters too, to keep the film from touching the wood as well as to collect the silver from the plate. Everything having been arranged before the plate was prepared, the exposure in the camera is the next operation. The time necessary to impress the image depends on many circumstances. So true. Quality of light, kind of lens, the size of the stop or diaphragm, character of the object to be copied. No rule can be laid down for the time to expose the plate. A few failures will soon teach that what is proper in every case, and the experience will make the practice of the process one of great certainty. The exposure being complete, the picture has now to be developed. So true. Time, experience, lighting conditions, places in the world, the optics, how you make your chemistry, you get to know all of that, and you can make some really good calls. I can, for the most part, go out in certain conditions with a certain optic and knowing my chemistry and get real close on exposure, even coming out of the gate, not even making a test exposure. So there's a lot of there's a lot to be said with experimenting and practicing with this technically and learning how to expose the plate. Pyrogallic acid may be used, but the following is to be preferred. So let's break this recipe down. Now, keep in mind, this is really interesting. This is so different than from what I do, but this is a recipe for making negatives. And I may try this because, yeah, it's interesting. The iron, and you guys can check my math here. The iron is at 5%. The iron is a restrainer or reducer. The restrainer is at 4%. Alcohol is at 6%. And we're talking about a 1.9 liter. It's a strange quantity of both the size he's making, 2 liters, although I used to make 5 liters a developer at a time. But he's doing a lot of commercial work. And everybody knows it's a pain to have to sit down in the middle of something. If you don't have enough chemistry, you want to be able to have it all there. So I broke it down into metrics and percentages. I like percentages. So just as an example, my negative developer is more like 2% iron, even 1.9% iron. The acid is not 4%, more like 8 or 9%, double that. And the alcohol is as little as I can use. Surely not, as little alcohol as I can use. I prefer not to even use any alcohol. And that's per liter. That's per liter. So he's at even half that. So, oh no, sorry. He's at 5% is a lot of iron for me. I do half of that. And then double that acid. Why is that? When I'm making a negative, I'll develop it for a minute or a minute and a half, 45 seconds. Even long, or a minute and a half. So he goes on to talk about the commercial acetic acid is cheaper than glacial and answers to the issues. If the exposure has been perfectly timed, the picture will appear very soon after developing the solution has been poured over the plate. Very, very interesting way to say this is what you look for. Pour it on the plate. If it's perfectly timed, the picture will appear very soon. I don't know. Is that 3-4 seconds? Is that 10 seconds? I don't know. Take more than sufficient of iron solution that will cover the plate, yes, in a glass measure, and pour it gently along the plate at the bottom, beginning beginning near the thumb and allow it to run toward the top with regular flow. That's exactly what I do. If possible, do not allow any of the developer to run off. I talk about this. You've got all that free silver on the plate, and you want to keep as much of that developer mixed with that silver on the plate as you can. You may lose a little bit, but I like to drain it back in the developer bottle or cup and push it back out. And this is what he says. Do not allow any of the developer to run off, as the silver on the plate would otherwise be washed away, whereas it is desirable to keep it on the glass, as it is wanted to assist in producing the image. Absolutely. Density, clarity, all that stuff. The picture will be seen to gradually increase in vigor, and when fully developed, the developer may be thrown off and a stream of water allowed to flow over the plate until all greasiness disappears. That's another greasiness thing, is once you've developed, and we do a 15-second, and then we adjust for exposure right, you drain that off, you're developing, and once you hit that 15, 20 seconds, you get it underwater, you flow it underwater gently, pull it out. If it's still greasy, push it back under the water. That's what he's talking about. The picture thus developed may be perfect, so as far as detail is concerned, but it also may happen that the image is not dense enough for printing purposes. Remember, they're talking about making a negative here. So we'll go through this real quick. This density may be increased by redeveloping with pyrogallic acid, 10 grains, citric acid, 25 grains. To this must be added a few drops of solution of silver nitrate, 20 grains, and water, 2 ounces. The effect can be watched and the development stopped at once by allowing water to flow over the plate. Between each operation, the plate must be thoroughly washed. The effect of the developing solution in producing the picture has been to reduce the iodide of silver contained in the collodion to the metallic state wherever the light has acted. Exactly. But where there has been no change caused by the light, the iodide is not reduced and can be removed. Exactly right. We won't go into negative redevelopment. It's in my book if you're interested. But I wanted to go over some of those, and we're already at time, but some of those are very interesting differences in what a lot of contemporary people work with and use now and teach too. My dark room is only 2 to 3 Celsius. Woo! Oh my goodness, that is cold, Jan. Pablo says, what should be the pyrogallic acid for percentage for developing, and what should be the difference with developing with FES, contrast, tone range, and density? The formula has a lot of iron, 113 grams. I know, it's crazy. Formula is crazy. Pablo, you can substitute ferrous sulfate for pyrogallic acid, basically. He likes to develop with ferrous sulfate like we do, and then redevelop with pyrogallic acid. And again, these are negatives. The only time you want to introduce pyrogallic acid is when you're making negatives. It's not good for positives. Could list the redevelopment formula? Yes, I can't right now, but maybe we can do. I'll see what I can do there. Maybe somebody can get it. The redevelopment formula is basically pyrogallic acid, citric acid, and water. And then you add a little silver nitrate to build that density. And that's what you do, is you watch it happen. Next week, we'll talk more about the making positives. Those were negatives. And keep in mind, too, in the 19th century, negatives were what people made, because it just made more sense commercially to be able to reproduce, make prints, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's the good one. So here we go. Pablo, we had a discussion via email. I've been extremely busy this week, but we had a quick discussion on how pH affects the silver bath. And I wanted to cover this a little bit so I could explain. Let me get a drink here. I could explain what pH does in your bath. pH is very, very critical. Not only is the content of the silver bath that we just talked about, 35 grain, 40 grain, 7%, 9%, whatever it is, not only is that super critical, but the pH controls the uptake of silver. In other words, when I grow plants, I grow a plant. I have the plant in the pot, and I check the soil, or I check if it's hydroponic, I can check the water. And plants have what's called pH lockout. You have to be in a certain zone for the type of plant, maybe pH 5 to pH 6, 5.5, for that plant to be able to uptake nutrients, right? So you've got to be in the right pH. Power, hydrogen, parts of hydrogen is what pH stands for. And if you're not in that specific zone for a plant, it's pH locked. It's locked out at 6 and it's locked out at 4, and it can't uptake the nutrients. Think about that as an example. As I say, positives require a slightly acidic pH, meaning pH 3 or pH 4. pH 3 is even kind of better in a way. Why is that? Slightly acidic silver baths will not produce or decompose, or double decomposition will not lay down as much silver on the plate. And you don't want a whole bunch of silver on positive, direct positive plates. You want them super thin negatives. So when you back them with black, that reflected light, you only need a little bit. And even the size of the silver changes, the grain structure changes a little bit. pH 4, pH 4.5, even pH 5, quite higher, more toward neutral. For negatives, that pH allows a lot of this double decomposition, lays a lot of thick silver down. Sometimes I've had people ask me this, Quinn, I've got a weird question. I'm working in my dark room for a couple of weeks and I'm pulling my plates out and I can see they're sensitized in the red light and they're a little bit see-through. They look, a little bit, thin, as it were. And then all of a sudden I change my silver bath, or I use a different silver bath, and now they're thick and milky and I can't see through them, and it looks super creamy. Well, what's happened there is they've either purposely or not adjusted their silver bath pH a little bit higher, and it's taken on more silver. So now you're just gonna, not that you waste silver, but it's not gonna do you any favors to put down that much silver for positives. So a pH 3, a pH 3.5, or even a pH 4 on positives, a pH silver bath is great. 4 to 5 on negatives is terrific. So you can play with that. Can you make images on either? Yeah, you can, and they'll produce if everything else is right. We're talking about optimizing and giving you the best chance of making a great positive or a great negative. And that's how the silver bath and pH, that's why the silver bath, the pH of the silver bath is very important. It is, for the WAC in layman's terms, it's the amount of silver you're going to lay down on that plate, and the amount, the quantity. So keep that in mind. And I put a little note there. Pablo's trying to help me with my Spanish, so I put a little note there for him to read. And the Spanish I love Spanish, so I used to be able to speak a little bit of Spanish, but I just told him estoy trabajando en tu correo electrónico en español. Por favor, sea paciente. Gracias, amigo. Thank you, Pablo. I'll get to it, believe me. So let's. Are there any questions on that? Any questions on the any technical questions actually? Yes, Dales, that's a great question. New silver bath measures pH 4. How do you move that to pH 5? That's a great question, Dale. I recommend that you don't. That you work. Pablo asked me a similar question. Pablo asked, do people actually have two different silver baths? And I do. I have a negative bath. I do. I keep several baths, but I have negative baths. And what I do, Dale, is I mix the silver bath, and you're right on. It comes out around pH 4. And I work that bath with negatives, and I'll gradually just start going more neutral as time goes on. And I don't adjust pH at that point. Now, theoretically, if you wanted to, You could take a little bit of baking soda, a tiny, tiny amount, or something that's, limestone, something that's got pH 14, and put a tiny amount in it and do your maintenance, and you can raise that pH 5 to pH 5 quite easily. Peter, hello, Peter O'Donnell. Hi, Quinn. pH 5, is there a need for redev then? My bath is at 4 at the moment. That another really good question. You will determine when you make that negative if you're see here again, we're saying, are we making an albumin print? Are we doing an oil print? Are we doing a salt print? Are we doing, gum bichromates or cyanotypes? What kind of print are we doing? But you'll be able to determine after that pH 4 bath, making that negative, if you need to redevelop. When you make a negative in camera and you don't redevelop it and it prints fine, that's called a foundation negative. You're going to get closer to that when you get the chemistry in line. I can make negatives all day long with positive chemistry, but I guarantee you I'm going to redevelop every single one of those if I want to print them, because it's just not dense enough. And that's why the Alfred Brothers book that we just looked at, if you find this lacking in density, what he's saying is if you're messing around with positive chemistry, or you haven't adjusted something to maximize that uptake of silver and make those negatives as dense as possible, you're probably going to end up redeveloping, is what I'm saying. So great question though, Peter. And there's Dale's. And I never like to tell people to put baking soda in their silver bath unless they're doing like heavy maintenance or something, but that's interesting, yeah. Pablo, gracias. So if I work in a cold area, can I increase the pH? Yes, that would help, Jan. That would actually help. Absolutely. I don't know how much it would help, but you'll definitely, if you're seeing like thin ambrotypes, too thin in that cold area, try a pH 5. Try a pH 5 for sure. So if I work in a cold area, cold bath can decrease the pH in the silver. Oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry. I thought you wanted to lay more silver down. If you're doing positives, that is cold though. You're working in a cold area. Yeah, more aggressive, exactly. You'll want to lay more silver down to get the same type of image in a cold. Silver baths are really funny and cold. They're easy to predict in heat, right? You get the veiling and all that stuff, mainly from the developer, but mostly from the developer actually. But silver baths, cold silver baths can put model marks and strange, like, God, the way they sensitize or decompose those iodides and bromides are very interesting. And you get all kinds of funky stuff, but same adjustment principle when apply mixing for silvers. Yes, same thing. And there you go. The old adage, the fuming albumin paper with ammonia, increased sensitivity, contrast, sodium citrate for color, all those kinds of things. Absolutely, they definitely apply. Malik, wondering if there's a redevelopment formula that you're used with iron instead of using gallic acid. Yep, that one that I just showed you right there in the Alfred Brothers book. He's using ferrous sulfate. And one of the things, redevelopment. Yes, you can use ferrous sulfate in place of pyro. Sorry, I misunderstood you, Malik. You can just substitute if you're doing 6 grams of pyrogallic acid, do 6 grams of ferrous sulfate. Yes, you can do that. It may take you a little bit more, but you can definitely do that for sure. And a lot of people don't. Again, pyrogallic acid is one of those things a lot of people don't want to play with. I get it, no problem. Yeah, and Jan says he goes 5 or 6 minutes in his bath, cold days. Yep, exactly right. You're right on it. Right on it. So here's my recommended reading. And I got a question about this. I've read this book a couple of times. But Geoffrey Batchin, or Geoffrey Batchin, I'm not sure if he's British. He is British. Or Australian, sorry. He's Australian. And he talks about the Australianness of Australian photography in this book. I'd be curious, does anyone know, number one, have you ever seen this book? It's a great book about proto-photographers, about why photography in 1839. Talks about silver nitrate, the discovery of the Italians in the 14th century, and the Arabs in the 9th century, and the camera obscura and things like that, right? Kind of leading up to all that stuff. But isn't it interesting? There's a collodion portrait of this guy here, Jeffrey Batchen. Anybody know who did that collodion portrait? I'd be curious. Obviously, probably someone in the UK, but maybe not. It's a great book. If you're interested, obviously you're interested in the history of photography, or you wouldn't be in here or watching this or listening to this. But it's a great book if you want to know kind of the events of how things happened to, bring Niepce and the pewter plate and the window at Le Gras, the 8-hour exposure, and then on to Daguerre and the daguerreotype and the Talbot first, I guess, and the paper negative and all that stuff. Great stuff. Peter says, great book, God for a Rainy Day and Thinking. Yes, it is a great book. And if you like this kind of stuff, and if you haven't read this, get the book. You'll get a lot out of it, especially if you're a collodion photographer. But if anybody knows who did that portrait, I'd love to know. Just out of curiosity. Great book. That's my recommended reading. Let's jump over here and do some shout outs. Andy wrote me this week, and he said, I did this podcast on influences, a photographer's influence, and you might find it interesting. And he mentions me in it. He talks a little bit about me and the effect influence people have as artists, as photographers. And if you've got a desire to educate or teach like I do, I love sharing information. I love turning people on to this process in particular and the variants thereof. And it's a great way to spread your philosophy and put ideas out there for people to explore and see if they're interested in. But he does a great photography blog. Most of it's film and digital, of course. It's a contemporary thing. But in this one, he talks a little bit about how photographers influence, what photographers influence you. And it got me thinking. He had some really nice things to say about me, and I greatly appreciate that. So check out Andy's podcast, and he talks specifically about Wet Collodion in there. And Paul Smith, I wanted to share this, and I asked him if I could, and he said yes. And most people, I will say, if you email me during the week, and I'm going to do this show on Saturday, and you have something reoccurring or interesting that the whole community might be interested in seeing, I like to ask you to share that, or that I can share that and show the community what's happened and what you did. Paul's come a long ways very quickly in the process. He's in Kent in the United Kingdom. And this part of the email that I got, he said he made some asphaltum for his glass plates. Now, it sounds strange right off the bat. I made some asphaltum for my glass plates. So asphaltum is usually made for metal plates, tin types, right? The asphaltum is what you bake on the metal, and then you have the ferro type or the tin type. We're talking about coating the plate with black asphaltum as a backer. So these are glass ambrotypes, clear glass ambrotypes that he's made asphaltum. Chapter 7 of my book, I have substratum in there, and I cover making this batter, this tin type batter, ferro type batter. It says Canadian balsam is hard to find here in the UK and expensive. This is one of the reasons I wanted to share this. The plasticizer, the Canadian balsam, or the tree sap acts as a plasticizer to keep the collodion flexible. And as it dries, it can crack and spider crack and all those kinds of things. So you need to put plasticizer both if you're doing asphaltum for tin types or ferro types, or for backing your glass plates, and your varnish for varnishing your positives and negatives. Make sure you have a plasticizer in there. It says, impatient, I added gum arabic. I did have linseed oil two on hand too. My hot plate is in the studio, got the mixture pretty hot, but both the thermometers only hit 120. C, couldn't tell it hit 160, but the granules melted. That's the most important part. The gilsonite melts, and the mixture was moving around looking close to boiling, but never did. Perfect. That's great. Cooled, but the following day I did a pour without filtering. By the next day, the cracks had appeared. I didn't think it would crack so soon. I reheated and added some linseed oil, and we'll do another pour soon. Exactly. And that's why it cracked. Gum Arabic won't quite handle it. And I wanted to show you this. So this is what spider cracks look like when you don't have plasticizer in your varnish or in this case, in the asphaltum. Kind of interesting, I think. And very few people have ever seen those small spider cracks. It usually takes a long time. But what Paul can do right now is make some batter, take your batter, heat it up again, and put another plasticizer in it. Something, I mean, you can even use lavender oil, right? Something that will prevent this from cracking like that. It's a neat effect. I've had people ask me how to do that. Just leave your plasticizer out. Don't put plasticizer in it. And I guarantee you it will do that. I had 40 by 50 centimeter plates do that on me. And what I did is I just I think what it was is I didn't have enough plasticizer in the particular batch of asphaltum I was backing those plates with. And I had to redo a couple of them, but it works great. We'll see you, Dale. I appreciate you stopping in. No problem. Steve Wilson, yes. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I want to say how much I appreciate the open garbage, share mutual knowledge to be found here. Thanks to all. Yes, absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. I totally agree. I totally agree. Good. Thank you for posting that, Jan. Jan put the in the StreamYard chat. He put the book up. I'll put it over on the YouTube site as well too. Thank you for that. It's a great book. No, any photographer would love it. I use balsamic turpentine. It's not expensive. Oh, super. Oh, Carrie Wares is the photographer that did that collodion portrait. I don't know her. I get. Is it a her? I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a her. Okay, I'm not familiar with her, but I was interested. I was kind of cool to see that his book. I just found his portrait came up. So, wow. There's Jeffrey Batchin, and he's got a Wet Collodion portrait. That's cool. Hey, Marcus, good to see you. Let me put this over on YouTube. Jan presented us that link there if you want to grab the Batchin Each Wild Idea book. And I recommend you. Oh, she's from Arizona. Good. I had no idea. Very cool. I always I mean, you'd think I'd be pretty much in touch with all the collodion photographers. I'm not anymore. I used to be. But man, it's grown so huge. It's like there's no way I know all these people. But I'm happy to see it. Oh, he put the link on YouTube, but was deleted. Ah, I just put it on YouTube. Let's see if they delete that one. There it is on YouTube. So yes, it is a great book and some great insight into there. And Paul, I appreciate you sharing these because, and then he had some other portraits that he's really coming along swimmingly, as we say in British English, swimmingly. Plasticizer, anyone? That's all I have, ladies and gentlemen. I know that you already know this, but I greatly appreciate your time. I greatly appreciate you spending time every week with me here. And hopefully we'll get all this stuff sorted out soon, and I'll be in full mode, and we'll start doing some things in the dark room and looking at physical objects and things like that. So I'm excited to see what happens over the next month or two. So you guys have a wonderful, safe weekend. Thanks for joining me. I hope you can make it next week. I hope it was worth your time, and we will see you next Saturday. And if you have any questions, you want to show some work next week, email it to me, wetplate@gmail.com, and we will get it going on. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Ciao.